2.12%. That is the number. Out of 100 non-vegetarian Adventists, followed for 2 years by Loma Linda, a little over 2 of them came down with type 2 diabetes. Hold that figure in your mind, because in a minute I am going to give you the other one, the one for the people at the same church, eating at the same potlucks, praying the same prayers, and it is less than half. It is a Tuesday in Loma Linda, California, and there is a man there who is 101 years old, and he drove himself to give a lecture this morning. He does not use a cane. He outlived both of his younger brothers by more than 10 years, and he will tell anybody who asks that it was not luck and it was not genes. His name is Dr. John Scharfenberg. He is a professor of nutrition at Loma Linda University, a graduate of the Harvard School of Public Health, and a Seventh-day Adventist, and he has spent the better part of a century watching one particular food do quiet work on the human body. Not a supplement, not a powder, a food you have in your cupboard right now and probably think of as ordinary. I want to walk you into what that food is, how much of it, and the reason it steadies blood sugar the way a slow fire steadies a room. But I am going to hold the deepest part of the why until the end, because the why is the part almost nobody tells you. Let me name the food category up front, because I do not believe in stringing you along. It is legumes, beans and lentils. The humble, cheap, boring bag of dried beans at the bottom of the shelf. That is the food most tied to steady blood sugar in the longest-lived Christians in America. And I will be honest with you before I have earned anything, because it matters more than the click that brought you here. It is not a magic bean. Nobody at Loma Linda is melting their blood sugar with a single spoonful of anything. What the beans do is different, and slower, and in some ways better. And I am going to show you exactly what they do and exactly what they do not do. 1 Corinthians, chapter 6, verse 19 and 20. Your body is a temple. 6 plain words that this whole audience has heard 1,000 times, and mostly heard as a thing about behavior, about what you put in your body that you shouldn't. Scharfenberg's generation of Adventists heard it about food too, about what you put in that you should. That is the whole difference, and it is on his plate every single day. Now, here is where I have to correct something I used to believe, because I read the Loma Linda story wrong for years, and maybe you have too. I used to think it was a diet story. Eat this list, avoid that list, live longer. It is not a diet story. It is a schedule story and a whole life story, and the beans only make sense inside it. So let me start with the man before the food, because the man is the proof. Dr. Scharfenberg does not eat dinner. He eats 2 meals, breakfast, and then a midday meal, and after that the kitchen is closed. He has said, plainly, that he has never had a drink of alcohol in his life, not one. He has never smoked. He keeps himself lean, deliberately, because he says being overweight raises your risk of dying from very nearly every disease there is, and he means that as a physician who has read the mortality data for 70 years, not as a man on a stage selling you a feeling. He exercises every day, and when people ask him the big question, the "how are you still here" question, he does not give them one trick, he gives them a stack. He has said you could lower your risk of heart attack, stroke, and diabetes by around 80% if you simply removed the lifestyle causes, 80%, from things that cost nothing and are sitting inside your own daily habits. That is the first honest thing you need to hold on to, and I am putting it early on purpose. The beans are not the reason he is 101. The beans are one instrument in an orchestra, and the orchestra is not smoking, not drinking, staying lean, moving every day, and resting on the 7th. If you take the beans and keep the cigarette, you have missed the entire point, and I would be lying to you to say otherwise. There is a small detail about his life that I think about more than the big ones. Those 2 brothers he outlived. They were his brothers. Same parents, same house, same growing up. Presumably a great deal of the same starting material coded into all 3 of them. And he buried both of them and kept going for another decade. And when he explains it, he does not reach for the word genes. He reaches for the word exercise. He says he moved and they did not, or not enough, and the 10 years between them came out of that gap. I cannot prove that from a stage, but I can tell you a man who has read the science for 70 years chose to explain his own brother's shorter lives with a thing he did with his body, not a thing written in his blood. That is a Loma Linda sentence if I ever heard one. The habit outran the inheritance. Set that aside. Here is what happens at the level of the blood. When you eat white bread, or a bowl of cornflakes, or most of what sits in the middle aisles of the store, the sugar in it comes apart fast. It hits your bloodstream like a bucket of water thrown on a floor. All at once, your pancreas scrambles, sends out insulin to mop it up. And for a body that has done this 3 times a day for 40 years, that scramble gets slower and clumsier, and one day it does not keep up. That is type 2 diabetes, told simply. A bucket thrown too many times. A bean does not throw a bucket. A bean is a slow drip. The starch inside a cooked bean is wrapped in fiber and packed in a form your gut has to work at. Some of it a thing called resistant starch, which mostly refuses to be digested as sugar at all. So the same amount of carbohydrate goes in, but it comes across the wall of your intestine like water through a cracked tap instead of a tipped bucket. Drop by drop. Your pancreas is not ambushed, it has time. And a body that is never ambushed, meal after meal, year after year, tends to keep its footing. Picture the pancreas as an old shopkeeper. Every time sugar comes through the door, he has to get up from his stool, walk to the counter, and serve it, and then sit back down. A bowl of cornflakes is 50 customers through the door in 1 minute, all shouting at once. The poor man is run off his feet, and if you do that to him 3 times a day for 30 years, one morning he just stays on the stool. He is tired. That is insulin resistance, and then diabetes, in a sentence. A bowl of beans is one customer every few minutes across the whole afternoon, browsing quietly. The shopkeeper serves each one, sits back down, catches his breath. He can do that for 100 years, because he is never once overwhelmed. Same store, same shopkeeper, completely different day. The food decided the pace of the day. You want a number for that, because I would. The glycemic index is just a scale of how fast a food raises your blood sugar, and white bread sits near the top. Lentils sit down around 22 to 29. Black beans 30, kidney beans in the 20s, chickpeas in the low 30s. These are among the lowest of any food a human being eats. Down at the bottom of the scale where the tide comes in slow, there is one more piece of that machinery that took me a while to appreciate, and it is worth 30 seconds because it happens after you think the meal is over. The resistant starch in beans, the part that would not be digested as sugar up in your small intestine, keeps going. It travels all the way down to your large intestine, and the bacteria that live there, the ones we are only now learning to respect, feed on it. They ferment it. And when they do, they release small compounds that seem to make the rest of your body a little more patient with insulin, a little better at handling the next meal's sugar. So a bowl of beans at noon is quietly helping you steady the toast at breakfast tomorrow. The bean works a second shift after you have left the kitchen. I do not want to oversell that mechanism, we are still mapping it, but it is real, and it is one more reason a food this cheap keeps out punching its price. Now, move with me back to the church, because this is the number I promised you at the start. Loma Linda is one of the places Dan Buettner named a blue zone, one of the handful of spots on Earth where people reach 100 at rates the rest of us do not. And the reason we know so much about why is that the Adventists studied themselves. Gary Fraser and his team at Loma Linda University ran a study called the Adventist Health Study, the second one, AHS2, and it followed around 96,000 people across the United States and Canada. This is not a brochure. This is one of the largest studies of diet ever done on this continent, and the results are not in dispute. They watched who developed diabetes. Over the follow-up, among the non-vegetarians in that cohort, the rate was that 2.12% I opened with. Among the vegetarians, it fell to roughly half of that, and among the strictest, the vegans, it came in near 0.5%. Read that again slowly. Same denomination, same doctrine, same Sabbath. The thing that moved the diabetes number was the plate, and the plate that moved it is built, day after day, on the bean. Remember the verse on the cupboard, the temple. This is what it looked like as a practice instead of a poster. Not a feeling about the body. A pot of beans on the stove. And I want to sit on that word potluck for a second, because it turns out to matter more than it sounds. When Loma Linda eats, it eats together. Saturday, their Sabbath. The tables come out and the dishes come from 20 kitchens and everybody is fed in the same room in the same afternoon light. That is not a quaint detail. Being alone is one of the quiet things that shortens a life. A bag of chips eaten by yourself in front of the television at 10 at night is bad food, sure. It is also nobody across the table from you, which may be the worst part. The Adventist almost never eats that meal, the lonely late one, because the day is built to put a person at a table with other people while the sun is still up. The bean gets all the credit in the title. The table deserves half of it. I told you I would hold the how, the amount, so here it is, the piece I left back. The Adventists who almost never get diabetes are not eating a spoonful of beans on a holiday. They eat legumes essentially every day. It is the ordinary protein of the house. And there is a study for the dose, an actual number you can act on. Back in 2012, in a journal called The Archives of Internal Medicine, researchers took people who already had type 2 diabetes and had them eat about 1 cup of legumes a day for 3 months. 1 cup, beans, lentils, chickpeas, split peas, whatever they liked. And at the end of 3 months their long-term blood sugar marker, the one your doctor calls the A1C, had come down by about 0.5 percentage point. Now I want to be careful and truthful about what that means, because 0.5 point does not sound like a mountain. It is not nothing, either. It sat in the range of what some blood sugar medications do. From a bean, from a cup of a food that costs less than the bread it replaces. And here is a line I have to say plainly, and I mean it as care, not as a caveat I am checking off. This is food and faith, not a prescription. If you are on medication for your blood sugar, do not change one single thing about it because a man on the internet told you about a study. Beans and your pills are not enemies, but your doctor is the one who knows your numbers, and adding a cup of beans a day is a conversation to have with them, especially if you already take something that lowers your sugar. I am not here to get between you and the person keeping you alive. I am here to show you what the 100-year-olds actually eat. I also want to be square with you about the word cure, because the title of a video like this can promise the moon, and I would rather keep your trust than your click. Beans do not cure diabetes. Beans do not reverse anything overnight, and they do not melt sugar out of your blood. And anyone who tells you a single food does that is selling you something. What the beans do is steadier and less dramatic and, over a life, more powerful than any of that. Eaten nearly every day, inside the rest of this way of living, they are a big part of why these people almost never develop the disease in the first place. Prevention is not as exciting as a miracle. It is just the thing that actually works. And it is quietly available to you at the price of a bag of Pintos. And it is not only the Adventists, which is the part that convinces me it is the food and not the theology. Go east, out of California, to the farm country of Lancaster County, Pennsylvania, to the Mennonite kitchens, a completely different corner of the Christian family with a completely different set of doctrines and the same pot on the stove. There is a woman there, call her Ruth, in her 90s, who has cooked dried beans from her own garden for the better part of 80 years, because that is what her mother did and her mother's mother, and she has never once looked at a glycemic index chart in her life. She does not know the science. She does not need to. She got the practice handed to her, wrapped in a way of living, and the practice was right long before anybody in a lab could tell her why. That is the thing that gets me. 2 branches of the church that would disagree on plenty across a fence, both quietly landing on the same cheap, slow, steadying food, generations before the study existed to bless it. When two very different people arrive at the same answer without talking to each other, I start to believe the answer. Now, where do you get them? Because I am not going to send you to a specialty store you do not have. You do not need one. A 1-pound bag of dried pinto beans is about $1.50 at Walmart, and it will feed you for a week. If dried beans feel like a project, canned beans work, and they work fine. Rinse them in the colander to knock the salt down, and they are ready. Bob's Red Mill ships lentils to all 50 states if your town is small. Costco sells them in bulk bags that make it the cheapest protein in the house. Cheaper than the chicken, cheaper than almost anything with a face. Beans are beans. We have spent a lot of money and a lot of years complicating the least complicated food there is. One more practical thing, because I get asked it every time, and the honest answer matters: the gas. Everybody worries about the gas, and if you have not eaten beans in years and you sit down to a full bowl tomorrow, yes, your body will complain, because the same fermentation that helps your blood sugar also makes a little noise while your gut relearns the food. The fix is not to quit. The fix is to start small, a few spoonfuls, and build across a couple of weeks, and soak your dried beans overnight, and pour off that soaking water before you cook. Your body adjusts. It always does. I mention it because I have watched people give up a food that could carry them into their 90s over 3 uncomfortable afternoons, and that is a sad trade. The full system, the whole week, the elders of Loma Linda and 6 Faith Kitchens actually live. The way Schaffenberg and the 97-year-olds build a plate that costs under $15 and honors the temple, we put it in a digital book called The Sabbath Supper Protocol. 200 pages, 30 recipes, a 90-day plan. Every food on the shelf at Walmart, Costco, Aldi, or Trader Joe's. The link is in the description, and the code on your screen takes you there if you are watching on the television. Now let me get back to the beans, because there is a mistake almost everyone makes, and it is costing them the whole benefit. They rush the bean, a dried bean cooked hard and fast, boiled until it bursts, or a bean poured out of a can and dumped hot into a sugary sauce and eaten in 2 minutes standing at the counter. You have undone part of what you came for. The magic, if we are calling it that, is in the slowness, and the slowness is not only in the bean, it is in the pot, and it is in you. The Adventist grandmother did not blitz her beans. She soaked them overnight in a bowl on the counter, cooked them low, and ate them at a table with a fork in the daylight before the sun went down. Schaffenberg's closed kitchen at night is not a side note. It is the same principle as the bean: one size up, slow the fuel down, give the body time. A meal eaten slowly, early, is a bean the size of a day. And here is the mistake underneath the mistake, the one that undoes people even when they do buy the beans. They treat it as a topping instead of a habit. They eat beans on the day they remember to, a serving here, a serving there, twice a month, on top of the same rushed, sugary, late-night eating they always did, and then they wonder why nothing changed. Of course, nothing changed. The Loma Linda number does not come from beans as a garnish. It comes from beans as the ordinary, unremarkable center of the plate, most days, for decades. Think about that word for a second. Ordinary. We are trained by everything around us to look for the extraordinary intervention, the thing you do intensely for 6 weeks and then stop. This is the opposite of that. This is the least intense thing imaginable, done for the rest of your life, so quietly you stop noticing you are doing it. The bean does not want to be your project. It wants to be your Tuesday. I said a while ago that I had this wrong for years, that I read Loma Linda as a diet story, and it is really a schedule story, and I want to actually land that now instead of just claiming it, because it changed how I understand the whole thing. When you line up everything these people do to their blood sugar and step back, almost none of it is about the specific food, and almost all of it is about the timing and the pace. The slow starch is timing. The 2 meals with the kitchen closed at night is timing. Eating in the daylight, and going to bed with an empty stomach instead of a full one is timing. The seventh day of rest is timing at the scale of a whole week. Take the exact same beans and eat them fast, late, alone, on top of a snacking habit, and you have kept the food and thrown away the schedule, and the schedule was doing half the work. That was my error. I kept staring at the plate. The answer was partly in the clock. If you want the simplest possible place to begin, and I do mean simple, here it is. This week, pick one meal, just one, that is usually white rice or white bread or pasta, and put beans in the middle of it instead. Lentil soup on Monday, a can of black beans rinsed and warmed over your rice on Wednesday, chickpeas thrown cold into whatever you were already going to eat on Friday. 3 meals, that is the entire assignment. Do not overhaul your life. Do not clear out your pantry. Do not buy a book of rules. Just move the center of 3 plates this week, from the fast food to the slow one, and notice, honestly notice, whether you are hungry an hour later the way the toast leaves you hungry. You will not be. That steadiness, that not hungry again feeling, is the same thing the machine is doing to your blood sugar where you cannot see it. Your stomach is telling you the truth about the tide. I read for a long time that the great enemy of the modern plate was fat. Then it was carbs. Then it was one nutrient or another. A new villain every few years. Always something to buy your way out of. I think most of that aisle is a tax on fear. And the Loma Linda data quietly embarrasses the whole shelf, because the food that outperforms it costs $1 a bag and has sat in the cupboards of the plainest kitchens in America since before any of us were born. Let me change the camera angle for a minute, because I want you to see one of these kitchens, not the study, the kitchen. There is a house near Loma Linda where the pot lives on the back left burner, and it is a heavy enameled thing, chipped on the rim, that came to the woman of the house from her mother. She keeps cranberry beans in it more often than not, the speckled pink and cream ones, and half the time she eats them the plain way, cold, out of the pot, standing up, before the coffee. Because at 90-something you eat when you are hungry, and you do not stand on ceremony. There is a sampler on the wall over the stove, stitched, faded, and it has that verse on it, the temple one, the one her mother put a needle to when this woman was a girl. She does not quote it. I have never once heard her quote it. She just lives underneath it, and the pot on the back left burner is the sermon. That is the thing I keep coming back to. We have made honoring the body into a complicated, expensive, anxious project, and these people made it into a bean on a Tuesday. Now, I owe you one more honest thing, and it is the limit of what we actually know, because I would rather tell you the edge of the knowledge than pretend there is no edge. We do not know, cleanly, how much of the Loma Linda longevity is the beans and how much is everything the beans travel with, the walking, the lean body, the empty plate after lunch, the 7th day where the whole town stops and rests and eats together and nobody is alone with a bag of chips at 10 at night. We cannot pull one thread out of that cloth and weigh it by itself. It is probably all of it, braided. But here is what we do know for certain, and it is enough to act on this week. In the largest study of its kind, the people who ate this food nearly every day got diabetes at roughly half the rate of the people who did not. That is not a promise about you. It is a fact about them, and it is a fact you are allowed to borrow. So here is the deepest part of the why, the part I held back the whole way. And it is smaller and stranger than you would expect. It is not really about the bean at all. It is about time. Every single thing the Adventists at Loma Linda do to their blood sugar is a way of slowing time down inside the body. The slow starch, the early, unhurried meal, the closed kitchen, the day of rest. They are not fighting sugar with a weapon. They are refusing to be in a hurry, at the table and everywhere else, and the body, given time instead of ambush, keeps its balance for 100 years. The bean is just the most ordinary teacher of the slowest lesson. Give it time. Give yourself time. Dr. Scharfenberg will be 102 soon, and on a given morning he is somewhere with a room full of people who came to hear a man who is still here, still driving, still lean, still telling them the same unglamorous truth he has told for 50 years. Do not smoke, do not drink, stay light, move every day, and eat the plain food, slowly, at a table, in the light. Somewhere near him tonight, a bowl of beans is soaking on a counter in an old chipped bowl, and in the morning it will go on the stove, low, and it will not be in any hurry at all. May your kitchen feel like hers tonight. If the kitchen table tone is what you needed, subscribe, and the next Loma Linda plate comes to your feed. The light is still on in that window. So is the pot,